Okay, good morning, Art. Um, I'm in the process of getting myself together. I'll be a moment more, and then we will begin. Art, if you see somebody dominating the YouTube chat, will you bring that to my attention with maybe an all caps message or something? Uh, you don't have to say anything about a specific individual, but um, you can say, just say good morning, Skip again in all caps, and I'll come look. I'll be sure to look for what you're worried about. Um, the, apparently the issue came up last week, and somebody was dominating the conversation, and so I want to make sure that that sort of thing is not happening, especially where they're proselytizing a political position, regardless of whether I would agree with the position or not. So this morning we will be reading from an essay by Kide Ching, who currently teaches at the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco, where he is a member analyst. He has been teaching Jung's Red Book in the candidate training program for several years. He has a background in community mental health in San Francisco, where he has focused on disenfranchised populations, particularly the LGBTQ and Asian communities with acute mental health issues. During the height of the AIDS epidemic, he was active in advocating for and creating services specifically targeted to the needs of Asian and Pacific Islanders with HIV, and was a founding member of what is now the Asian Pacific Wellness Center. He received a Master Social Work from San Francisco State University and a Master Fine Arts from the San Francisco Art Institute. In addition to his private practice, he has worked as an artist for over 40 years, and that is the author of um, the current article. Excuse me while I deal with an itch in my nostril. More information than you probably wanted to know. There, maybe that'll deal with it. Okay. As you see, I'm out of mourning. Um, I'm no longer wearing all black, and the reason for that is that I've come to the realization, as most people do at a funeral, that the country I stood up for in the late 20th century is dead, and we have to build a new country. So I'm working on that now, and I hope everyone that sees this um, will join in the building of a new country. Uh, there might be difficult for a while, but we will do it. Uh, okay, thanks, Art. I will mention it to others as I see them. Um, okay, so Aging with the Red Book by Kide Ching. Sanford L. Drob, in Reading the Red Book, states, Jung's Keeping the Red Book, his strangest and perhaps most important work in his entire oeuvre, in his kitchen cupboard for so many years, and it's remaining unpublished for many years thereafter, has the effect of giving us the experience of awakening from a dream in which Jung has spoken to us from beyond the grave. Recently, at the C.G. Jung Institute in San Francisco, this awakening continued when I had the pleasure of being involved in an intensive training on Jungian psychology attended by Mandarin-speaking students and therapists primarily from China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Their hunger for imaginal experience, so aligned with the spirit of the Red Book, contrasts with the current trend in our profession in the United States, where there has been a foreclosure of the imaginal. The psychotherapy profession in their home countries seems unfettered by the biases that can constrict our work here. Teaching is, of course, also transformative for the teacher in that what is taught is reflected back with the student's own perspectives. These students brought me back, so these students brought me back to the edges of Jung's frontier. Okay, before I go on, I just want to mention that I'm reading today from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. This is volume 2 of a 5-volume series on the Red Book, and even the editors of this book were very surprised at how many people wanted to write essays about the Red Book. And in total, there are approximately 70 essays in the 5 volumes. And so there's plenty to read about. Okay. So what is he talking about in this first paragraph? As he says, their hunger for imaginal experience, so in line with the spirit of the Red Book, contrasts with the current trend in our profession in the United States, where there has been a foreclosure of the imaginal. The psychotherapy profession in their home countries seems unfettered by the biases that can constrict our work here. Okay, well, this is good news, but let me see if I can explain this so that it's clear. Good morning, Deborah, uh, and good morning, Richard. And if somebody on the YouTube chat gets a little bit complicated and is trying to promote political agenda, please bring it to my attention. You can just say good morning, Skip, in all caps, and I'll take that as a symbol that I need to address the issue, and I will do. So the issue in this first paragraph, which is the most fundamental issue we currently face in psychology and religion in the world, is that one side of psychology, which is the largest side of it, I guess, thinks that everything can be resolved rationally, and that means coming up with theories and logical developments, something philosophers do. Philosophers set down railroad tracks in our psyche, and they want us to go down their track. The same with religions. All religions say, this is my way, this is my religious way, and everybody else is wrong. Well, the problem with that is that that is not correct, and that's not the way we live in the world. We live in a rational world that has laws that we don't necessarily control. We're totally dependent upon our environment and our planet to produce the things that we need. Of course, we um, nurture those things in farming and in cattle and chicken raising and that sort of thing for our benefit, but none of them come out of a factory. The only thing that when you go to the grocery store, everything you eat, everything that you eat was once alive in some way. Okay, unless you're planning to eat the boxes of the cornflakes or the saran wrap around the beefsteak. Everything that you would purchase at a grocery store to eat, regardless of whether it's good for you or not, um, is was once alive in some way, and um, we need to have the produce of our earth just to survive on a daily basis. And we very rarely think about it. But in psychology, um, there's one side that says, oh, that's just your imagination and it's not real. Well, what Carl Jung has proven to us quite emphatically is that the psyche is in fact real. And one of the things that he says is that um, if somebody imagines that you should be executed and then proceeds with that, somebody else will do it. And that all was done in their imagination. But it happened because somebody laid down certain railroad tracks in our society or whatever it is. Sometimes it's what we need to do, and sometimes it's inappropriate. Um, and Richard says theories are fine, but when you take pics and a million tiny faces show up in mist, then you know that it's supernatural. And, um, of course, uh, photographs we take today are filled with pixels, of uh, larger and larger quantities, but they're still fooling the mind. You can see what I'm talking about if you look at frame by frame at a motion picture. They're all still images, but when you play it at 60 frames per second, then it seems to be um, active and a normal environment. But it's not actually a normal environment when you're looking at a television or a movie screen. Um, there's nothing there but a white screen, and there's a projector that's projecting all these dots onto the screen, and our mind is able to interpret it in a certain way. And so, uh, yeah, Argophanes says coffee contains cockroaches. Well, probably, and bananas contain um, tarantulae, tarantulas sometimes. And, the people that manufacture our food do the best that they can. And and manufacturing is a complicated task that requires a lot of machinery to aid us in our daily activities, but they can't get everywhere and do everything. And so, sometimes contaminants do get into our food, and we have to be aware of that. But we mostly don't want to think about it. Mostly we want to rely on Folgers or whoever it is to get as many cockroaches out of the coffee as possible. That doesn't necessarily happen adequately, but for the most part, we do have government agencies that inspect our food and make sure that it's pure. And if we don't have those inspectors, then I'll leave it to your imagination what happens then. Um, and so my point is that the imagination, the universe itself is full of imagination. And if if you don't realize that and realize that it's beyond our ken, um, then um, then you haven't understood the way the universe works. And I often show this image, but I'll show it once more so that you get my point. Okay, everything that you have ever known and that mankind has ever known uh, is took place on that pale blue dot out in space. As far as we know, this planet harbors the only life in the universe. We haven't found any example of a living creature of any kind that lives on another planet as yet. Not a single-celled organism even. And so that's the truth. And so everything that we do that we think is important in our lives is happening on that pale blue dot and has always happened on that pale blue dot. And there's nothing else to be known about it. And so, anyway, let's see. Richard says spirits come out of everyone with their breath, but they have not the eyes to see. I see them in the air, and when I take a pic, they are there just as I saw them. Well, that's amazing facility you have, Richard. And I suppose if we all had cameras such as that and a psyche that works the way yours does, then we would all see it. But for the most part, we have to imagine these things. Um, just a second. And Deborah said, thoughts do have power, and action is preceded by thought. Collective thought is also likely to manifest. And that's absolutely true. And Jung, late in his life, in I think 1957 or 58, said to the Reverend David Cox that when he says God, he means the unconscious and the unconscious of an individual. And if we're talking about the collective unconscious, then we're talking about what humans have called God since the beginning of time. Um, and and so when we talk about collective thought, uh, we are reacting to the world in the same way that starlings reacted to the world. I mean, if they're up flying as I forget what the word for the flock of starlings is, but they fly back and forth, and all the birds change direction almost intuitively and instantaneously. And we see that in human activity of all kinds in all countries. So um, the collective unconscious can be represented in small doses or large doses. We can talk about humanity itself, and then we can talk about nation states, and we can talk about um, political boundaries of all kinds. Uh, and and each one has an emulation of what God is for that group. And there might come a time, I hope there is a time soon, when all human beings agree on the certain truths um, about the world. And let's see, I'm still trying to set my screen so I can see it properly. And so yeah. And so Richard says the spirits that cause the mysteries are all dragons. Well, I'm wearing a T-shirt today that says all dragons have a soul, and and so soul of the dragon, um, let's see, heart of the phoenix is the total logo on my T-shirt today. So hi, Sheree, nice to see you. Listening to classical music can never be criticized as far as I'm concerned. And we're glad you're here, though. Um, so, yeah, and quantum theory an interesting interesting, but I can't claim to understand except in very general terms. And of course, we all know that we know nothing about quantum theory. Um, and and it only exists in the minds of scientists who understand it. And let's see, maybe I ought to stand up a little bit so that you can see my whole T-shirt. So, yeah, I guess I have to stop my cloaking for a moment so that you can see it. Uh, okay, right. So, soul of a dragon, heart of a phoenix, and there's the two phoenix, the dragons and the phoenixes are fighting. And of course, that's a traditional idea um, from Chinese philosophy for thousands of years. And I even purchased a rug 40 years ago in Hong Kong that has a dragon and a phoenix locked in a terrible fight. Um, and what we need to do, though, is we need to come beyond the terrible fight. As a species, we need to gain enough consciousness so that we're able not to be fighting all the time about these things. And right now, we've got a very long way to go because we still have 99.9% of the population in various forms believe in some sort of uh, supreme being and um, not understanding that God resides in our heart. Um, And this is part of the teaching of C.G. Jung. Let's see. So Deborah says, well, quantum physics says everything is vibrating and matter is too. And matter of all kinds is made of atoms at various levels of refinement. And as I understand it, we human beings come from the fifth generation of stars. In other words, stars were created. They made things in their solar systems, um, and those things got heated up very hot, and then the matter of those planets and stars got blown out into the universe again, and that happened at least 3 iterations before we could be evolved from the process. And as far as we know so far, we are the only examples. Now, having said that, we've been around, I guess, for 5 million years or so, life on Earth, and I'm sorry, 4 billion years, 4 to 5 billion years or so, life on Earth. Um, but the universe is, we're told, 13.6 or 0.7 billion years old. And so a lot of things happen before and after. And even if we survive and continue for another 5 billion years, um, and then we flame out because our sun becomes a red giant and then dies. Um, when that happens, another intelligent species may develop somewhere in the universe and never know about us. That's certainly a possibility. So anyway, reading on. As nations are mobilizing to protect their borders in this current climate of anti-immigration, one interesting development enabled by recent technology, unimaginable when I first entered the field, is the capacity to conduct sessions with international clients over the internet. When working with someone from another culture on Skype, both parties meet while remaining firmly rooted in their own context. The dynamics of assimilation, the privileging of one culture over another, and the reliance on a conceptual framework based on certain assumptions become elements for ongoing reflection. Instead of fusion, there is a heightened appreciation of separateness. Absent the Judeo-Christian context that Jung was responding to in his Red Book, how do some of his concepts hold up? One of Jung's key points in the work pertains to the fixed approach of Christian dogma, which precluded its ability to renew itself to meet the challenge of continued relevancy. I imagine that this sense of renewal also holds true in the way we might need to approach Jung's concepts. Um, and, Christian apologists keep trying to renew Christianity, but we've actually, from the time of Martin Luther and the Enlightenment, we've been moving away from Christianity as a species, and we need some other hat to, or some other hook to hang our hats on. So my parents were Buddhist Taoist. I was educated in a Catholic school and grew up in Hawaii at a time when stretches of it were still rural and the Polynesian nature gods still very much present, at least for a young boy. Jung indicated that one cannot simply replace one's own gods with those from another culture, but there are many like me who come from a place of multiplicity. And in this age of the internet, the cultural and geographic demarcations are rendered more fluid. One's own sense of culture is less unified and coherent. With that said, I will now shift into the main thrust of this essay, my personal experience of the Red Book with respect to the experience of aging. What follows consists of two parts written a year and a half from each other. The first explores passages from the Red Book in relation to themes that I struggle with as I look forward toward aging. The second part, less tethered to particular passages from the Red Book, but is informed by its spirit. It comes out of an attempt to define a personal cosmology that attends to spirit, soul, and body by heeding Jung's call to enter into the imaginal. Since childhood, I've been intrigued with how we experience time, the continuous flow that we segment meaningfully into past, present, and future. I've often tried to grasp that elusive moment when one phase in the sequence transitions into the next. The Romans had the two faces of Janus, their ancient god of the gate, to represent this passage from one reality to another. Now that I'm in my 60s, I think about the thread that connects who I've been and what I am today with my entry into old age. I see both continuity and disruption, everything remaining the same yet being completely different. I can define so clear I can define no clear line marking the moment of crossing over. One day I woke up an old man. It was an awareness that had come and gone before, but this time the image stuck. What can I really relate to that? Um, so, good morning, Kathy. Um, so, Roberta says, oh, this is a closed group now. Richard has disappeared. Well, Richard still looks like he's here. And why do we no longer syncretize deities? I'm not quite sure what you mean by syncretize, Archiphanus. So if you will explain that to us, um, that will be helpful. My attitude toward aging is far from being in a unified state. Not every part of me is cooperating or going about it at the same rate. I question whether I may be holding on to certain elements from my youth far past their time. How do I personally arrive at a meaningful representation of my current condition? What sacrifices are required for renewal? It is useless to turn to our culture for coherent forms that express a degree of complexity. Perhaps what I'm looking for goes beyond what can be contained. James M. Redfield speaks abruptly, or I'm sorry, James M. Redfield speaks aptly to the source of my anxiety and confusion when he writes about this concept in purity in ancient Greek culture. Quote, purity is an aspect of things as they are ordered by properties and limits. If dirt is matter out of place, purity has to do with proper places and times, with proportion and distribution, and with the matter proper to a given form. The unclean is often the ambiguous, the anonymous, the interstitial. Unclean things escape from categories and blur our comprehension of categories. Dirt is one kind of impurity, rot is another. An object may become impure as it starts to turn into something else. But if it actually becomes that other thing, it may again be pure. Okay. Yeah, and Deborah says through meditation we may connect with the eternal self and others. Agreed. When I struggle with what I struggle with has to do with those interstitial, impure experiences that exist outside bounded spaces. One moment they can promise juicy vitality, the next moment not. Rot. The next moment, rot. It is the muddle of becoming as an ongoing process. This ambiguous, unclean state is what my psyche needs, and is what I've found in the maddening, revelatory, reverie-inducing pages of the Red Book. Jung comments on the importance of a fully lived life. Quote, if no outer adventure happens to you, then no inner adventure happens to you either. The part that you take over from the devil, joy that is, leads you into adventure. In this way, you will find your lower as well as your upper limits. It is necessary for you to know your limits. If you do not know them, you run into the artificial boundaries or barriers of your imagination and the expectations of your fellow men. But your life will not take kindly, to being hemmed in by artificial barriers. Life wants to jump over such barriers. And you will fall out with yourself. These barriers are not your real limits, but arbitrary limitations that do unnecessarily that do unnecessary violence to you. Therefore, try to find your real limits. I'm just looking at how long this essay is. Okay, 10 pages. Maybe we can get through it. A particular confusing area at this life stage is sexuality. My body is no longer a reliable companion to my desire. What has long felt like an expression of my nature can now seem like an awkward fit. Must Eros at some point detach itself from matter? Jung writes, truly his soul lies in things and men, but the blind one seizes things and men, yet not his soul in things and men. If he possesses his desire, and his desire did not possess him, he would lay a hand on his soul, since his desire is the image and expression of his soul. And yet, my relationship to these matters and what they tell me about my soul are linked with my knowledge and experience of them in matter. Despite my yearning for the divine, I am still a creature of matter and have a life to live there. But what kind of life? How am I to determine when is to be given up, what is to be given up for the sake of the unknown? When is detachment release from the compulsion to create the familiar, not flight from the humiliation and befuddlement of no longer being able to function in the accustomed way. A refusal to tolerate the loss of heroic clarity and to continue on in the present of rot, of gradually becoming something else. What would it mean to transcend culturally imposed social notions about aging, the restrictions foisted on one's own imagination, and to arrive at a wisdom of myself that is truly personal? Yeah, I gotta stop using these spectacles because they're making it difficult for me to read. I'm sorry. I will, when I'm doing this, I'm not able to, um, I'm, I'm not able to uh, see the YouTube chat. I'm really wondering where we are on the YouTube chat. And okay, okay. So I'm sorry I'm unable to see the YouTube chat when I'm reading. Um, so anyway, uh, I'm going to read the last sentence or so. What would it mean to transcend culturally imposed notions about aging, the restrictions foisted on one's own imagination, and to arrive at a vision of myself that is truly personal? My conflict regarding the place of sexuality is represented by two old friends. One of them has been bereft of sexual sensation since prostate surgery. I don't miss it in the least, he tells me, as I'm cooking dinner for company. It's liberating. It's freed me for other things. From this state of grace, he eyes me sympathetically when I say that I'm not there yet. Another friend, wrapping his arms around me, says emphatically, "Don't you even think about giving it up? Not any part of it." He himself is recoiling from a remark made to him by a woman he has begun to see seriously. He described showing up at her door in a wife beater undershirt. She disdainfully dismissed him as an old man in serious denial. "Gosh, that's mean," I said to him. "You look great in those shirts." Yeah, I know that most women do not like those t-shirts, such as it is. A footnote featuring a quote from Black Book 6, which Sonu Shamdasani explains as Jung's recognition of the threefold nature of the soul, speaks to my soul's inner struggle. Jung's soul says to him, "If I am not conjoined through the uniting of the below and the above, I break down into three parts. The serpent, and in that or some other animal form, I roam living nature demonically, arousing fear and longing. The human soul, living forever within you, the celestial soul, as such, dwelling with the gods, far from you and unknown to you, appearing in the form of a bird. One day, noting the sparsity of men past a certain age at my gym, I remarked to a fellow member, someone I'd never spoken to before, about the seeming disappearance of people I used to run into over the years. Where do they go now? And where do they go now that we're old? They're all dead, he said, referring to the statistic that 4 out of 5 gay men living in San Francisco, born between 1950 and 1955, died from the AIDS epidemic. I have not been able to verify this estimate, but the shock of his comment brought me back to that collective heartbreak when a generation of gay men, my generation, was decimated. The pain from that time still deepens, still deepens. Uh, I'm sorry, let me read it again. The pain from that time still deep and immobile. I'm still traumatized, I said. Early on in my own analysis, in my early 30s, still unformed and uncomfortable in the world, I dreamed of a young girl who led me to a hill overlooking a valley. She pointed to the world below and, like Satan in the New Testament, said to me, "This could all be yours." My response to her 3 decades later, as I look back at my own suffering, mistakes made, past love disappointment, is material. I'm sorry. I have managed to hypnotize myself, so I went out for a few moments, and this is not good. This is what happens when we read something as complex as what is being discussed here, because it's a classic hypnotic induction to try to get the mind to think about things that it doesn't usually think about. And very soon, what happens is your mind gets overwhelmed, and you then become subject, not only subject to um, suggestion about what you should do, but it also can put you to sleep. And so I've been experiencing this for the last few years when I'm doing these readings, that I can be reading one of these things and just conk out. And I apologize for that. It works better if I have friends here on the Zoom panel who can keep pushing me. When I only have the YouTube channel to work with, it's silent, and so if I fall asleep, I may be asleep until I wake up naturally. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to leave the discussion of tank tops for the moment. And Kathy says, how would you summarize what you're reading? Okay, I'm going to think about that one, Kathy. I'll come back to you. I lost many friends, and Cherie says, I lost many friends with AIDS in the 1980s in New York City. my best friend was male, and I was with him for 3 years during this illness, sat in hospice with many others. And Richard says, like an involuntary state of meditation, that's the hypnosis. Okay. Um, well, how would I summarize what I'm reading? Well, I think Mr. Ching is kind of describing how he interacts with Jung in his unique situation as a gay man. And that's perfectly valid, of course. And, each of us interacts with Jung in a different way. Um, and we have to understand that um, we're talking about things where when I speak them, um, your psyche, whether you intend for it or not, um, looks back inside yourself and says, "Am I like that, or is that me?" And so on. And I think a lot of times um, we we do see similarities between ourself and what's being read, and so that carries us along. And it's like if you read a novel, um, at least for me, I imagine I see the movie of the novel uh, as I'm reading. I don't even see the words after less than 30 seconds. I start seeing the imagery that the novelist is presenting. And in this case, we're looking at a variety of situations that particularly gay men, and because he's speaking as a gay man, um, may recognize. And if you're not gay, and I'm not consciously gay, but if you're not gay, you can at least try to put yourself in the position of the other person, and see how that feels in various ways. So anyway, let's see. And Kathy asks, did he interact with Jung or with Jung's work? I don't believe he was active in Jung's time, Cherie. So I don't, or Kathy, because so I don't think he's describing a direct interaction with Jung. He's describing a direct interaction with the Red Book, which was hidden away for 48 years before it was published in 2009. Um, and and Kathy says, was Jung anti-gay? I do not believe he was. I think he took people as they came to him, and he didn't he didn't really criticize anybody's path. Um, I don't remember anything where he's conducting a tirade against the gays or any such thing. He did say that he had only 6 clients who were practicing Catholics, I think. For most of his life, he had only had 6 clients who were practicing Catholics. And one could say that, and I think the implication I infer from what he says is that if you're contained within, if your psyche is in this container, which amount is Catholicism, then you're good. You should probably stick with that. And um, what what I was and still am in many ways is that I wasn't adequately contained in any religion. And I had the experience of living in Japan when I was 15 to 17 years old. And I lived about 1 mile from the great Buddha in Kamakura, which is a bronze that was made in 1295. Okay, so in 1295, artisans were able to hammer things together in bronze, which requires producing a great deal of heat, among other things, and putting it together in such a way that it's still a beautiful um, reference to the Buddha. Um, and for the longest time of my life, I said to myself, what is this guy doing? I don't understand this. Now I know, of course, that he was meditating, but um, and therefore interacting with his inner being. Um, but I never knew that when I was certainly not when I was in high school and even um, into my middle age. I didn't know that. I've been back to look at the Daibutsu, they call it in Japan, the Great Buddha, uh, and I now understand it much better. In the gates of the entrance to the temple, there are these very fierce-looking um, gods that are looking very, very nasty and fearsome. And um, and what that is supposed to say to you is, you're living in this world where all these fearsome things happen to you also step through. I mean, if you stand in front of that gate, you see the two uh, temple guardians and the guardian dogs, which are actually lions, at the entrance to the temple. But you can see through the gate, you can see this great Buddha, which is 43 feet tall. And the message there is step through all those things that are in your everyday life and go into meditation, and you will find peace. Um, if and that's one of the things that you find through meditation is a certain amount of peace. Okay. Cherie says when I hear Jung himself speak, the sparkle in his eyes and his laughter and humor is empowering. I agree entirely. And Arkaphane says, give me second Krishna instead of Gautama. Okay. I don't really know anything about the second Krishna, so I have nothing to say about that. Um, Kathy says that Marie-Louise von France um, and Jung were probably giggling all the time with one another. I have no doubt about that. Yeah. Richard, in answer to the question about gaze, cites Isaiah 56, for thus saith the Lord unto the eunuchs that keep my Sabbaths and choose the things that please me and take hold of my covenant. Even unto them will I give in mine house and within my walls. Okay, so yeah, fine. I'm I'm less interested in the details of individual religious practice. Okay, let me see if I can figure out where I am. Okay, so Jung has said you should try to find your own limits. And of course, at my age, I've done that. A lot of people, most people do. You run into the limits of your age. Okay. A footnote featuring a quote from the Black Book 6, which Sona Shamdasani explains as Jung's quote recognition of the threefold nature of the soul, speaks to my soul's inner struggle. Jung's soul says to him, quote, if I am not conjoined through the uniting of the below and the above, I break down into three parts, the serpent, and in that or some other animal form I roam, living nature demonically, arousing fear and longing. The human soul, living forever within you, the celestial soul, as such dwelling with the gods, far from you and unknown to you, appearing in the form of a bird. One day, noting the sparsity of men One day, noting the sparsity of men past a certain age at my gym, I remarked to a fellow member, someone I'd never spoken to before, about the seeming disappearance of people I used to run into over the years. Where did they all go now that we're old? And the response was, they're all dead, he said, referring to a statistic that 4 out of 5 gay men living in San Francisco, born between 1950 and 1955, died from the AIDS epidemic. I have not been able to verify this estimate, but the shock of his comment brought me back to the collective heartbreak when a generation of gay men, my generation, was decimated. The pain from that time still deep and immobile. I'm still traumatized, I said. Early on my own analysis in my early 30s, still unformed and uncomfortable in the world, I dreamed of a young girl who led me to a hill overlooking a valley. She pointed to the world below and, like Satan in the New Testament, said to me, this could all be yours. My response to her 3 decades later, as I look back on my own suffering, mistakes made, past love disappointed, is mirrored in a conversation Jung has with his soul. Quote, you took away where I thought to take hold, and you gave me where I did not expect anything, and time and again you brought about fate from new and unexpected quarters. What I sowed, you robbed me of the harvest, and where I did not sow, you give me the fruit 100-fold. And time and again, I lost the path and found it again where I would never have foreseen it. You upheld my belief when I was alone and near despair. At every decisive moment, you let me believe in myself. And so I think, this is an experience that many of us have, certainly I have had, where things, best laid plans of mice and men, things don't necessarily turn out the way you expect. And so one goes on. I mean, in my case, if I sort of recount some of those things, um, I don't know what I expected to come out of college, but I didn't expect to uh, come out of college as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. But that's in fact what happened. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant on the day I graduated from college, which happened to be the same day that the Naval Academy graduated that year. And so my date of rank is the same as my classmates, all of whom by now are long since retired, because that was a long while ago, almost 60 years ago. Um, and but in any case, I followed the bouncing ball of what I had to do as a Marine Corps officer, and gradually found myself into Chinese language school, which is something that I wanted to actually do. And I was following a an example of my college advisor who, at the end of World War II, had studied Japanese. And believe it or not, he studied Japanese at Doane College in Crete, Nebraska. And meanwhile, I studied Chinese at Defense Language Institute in Washington, D.C. Um, and And so I went to Vietnam as an intelligence officer, not as a infantry officer. Although all Marine officers are infantry officers first, because we all go to the basic school, so we all get basic infantry training from the jump, with the possible exception of some Marine aviators. But even aviators who get trained as a pilot, um, if they're going to stay in the Marine Corps for a career, have to go back and go through basic school. So during Vietnam, they were training up some aviators and not requiring them to go immediately to basic school, but to go into the Fleet Marine Force so that they could get to Vietnam faster. Um, but all of those men who decided to stay in the Corps had to come back and go to the basic school. So all Marine officers are essentially infantry officers. But one thing leads to another, and at the time, I never even considered going to law school, and it was only when I was in Vietnam, and for 3 months, I was housed with three military lawyers, and they encouraged me to go to law school. And so I ultimately did at their encouragement. And I enjoyed going to law school very much. The challenge was interesting. But then I found that I detest the practice of law. And so I did it for 5 years. And 3 years into it, I went to business school so that I could chuck my legal career and become a businessman, which I did then for about 40 years. So um, one thing leads to another, and you don't know where you're going to end up. And the idea is that you have to learn. And so if you had asked me at any time since I graduated from college up till about 4 years ago whether I was actually going to be a school teacher, which I was certified to do in the state of New York in 1968, but I never taught a day K through 12 until I was 75 years old. And if anybody had ever told me that I was preparing for a career that I would begin when I was 75, geez, I couldn't have envisioned that. And yet I end up school teaching and actually liking it, loving it in a weird kind of way. Um, at age 76, I became a Unit 1 teacher. The first year I was just a substitute, but um, I now teach in our toughest high school, where pretty much you have to be suspended a couple of times to even come to our school. And if you're not suspended a couple of times, your parents can send you there, but it's because they're suspending you because of misbehavior. So um, I enjoy working in that environment with those students. Um, and here I am just about to click over 79 or yeah, 79 years old, and I'm still teaching full time. And by the way, next week is my 79th birthday on Sunday. So watch this channel for whether I'm going to come on or not, because I don't know what my wife has planned for my birthday day, and it's possible that she may call me away. However, I will otherwise try to be present, but let's see what happens. Um, so So Archifanes says when a dynasty is destroyed, its traditions get vanquished, and the rest of the family becomes involved in irreligion. Uh, and I don't know what the reference is. Archifanes BG 140. Um, yeah, I would say that is only true to a limited extent. I think that Jung would take the position that aspects of a culture or a religion are passed through the unconscious in many myriad ways. Um, I'm thinking of Richard Heinlein's um, novel, Stranger in a Strange Land, where uh, a human being who has been grown up on Mars comes back to the Earth, and I'm not quite sure if I've got the details right, but um, he finds, all the mores different and so on. And there's been at least one society has been uh, lost, but I think from that society they have the word grok, which I like to use. And the book is essentially a 250-page definition of what grok means. And so nobody really remembers in the novel uh, where the word came from, but it it means understanding so deeply that um, you've absorbed the essence of the society that first came up with the word, something like that. And so Kathy says she dislikes grok. Well, I'm sorry, Kathy. I happen to like it because it expresses um, what I understand after long study, let's say, of Jungian psychology. I don't understand everything, but I've basically grokked Jung's essence, and he doesn't have to physically be alive for me to get that. And indeed, when he was alive, his life and mine uh, overlapped by 15 years. He died when I was 15. Um, uh, there were many things that occurred that um, point back to Jungian psychology, and I can only point back to them in my dotage. But for example, the event that is depicted in the play that I acted in as C.G. Jung, occurred on October 6th, 1946, which was the day after my birthday. And so that actual event occurred one day after I was born. And uh, the woman who um, the woman who made sure that Jung's collected works were translated into English and uh, created into a 20-volume series um, was Mary Conover Mellon, who obviously was a, um, a relative of mine, a cousin of mine, because all Conovers come from the same tree. And so uh, Mary Conover Mellon founded the Bollingen Foundation, which keeps Jung's ideas alive to this day. And fortunately, she was married to a very wealthy banker. Um, Kathy liked my performance as Jung. Thank you, Kathy. You're so kind. And thank you, Cherie, also. The entire play is called The Analyst and the Rabbi, and it was performed only one time at the Montana Theater in Helena, Montana, and we recorded it on film, so you can go see this 1 hour one act play here on this YouTube channel just by going into The Analyst and the Rabbi. There are two versions that have been performed, one by some very highly esteemed Jungian analysts, um, of which I am not one, and one by my team, uh, with my friend Tim Holmes, the artist, as our director. And it worked out pretty well. We had fun with it. And it's one of the prouder highlights of my life as I think about it now. Uh, Sheree says we all on a spiral path. No growth takes place in a straight line. There will be setbacks along the way. There will be shadows, but there will be patches of light and fountains of joy as we grow and progress. Awareness of the pattern is all you need to sustain the way. And I think that's a quote from Jung, so thank you for that. Um, uh, And Thank you, Cherie, for telling me to enjoy my birthday and into whether I'm physically here or not. I shall certainly enjoy it. Uh, all right, so reading on. Let me take a little sip of water here. Couple of months ago, Dave, David Lamble, a columnist for the Bay Area Reporter, a local gay newspaper, reprinted a portion of a 1989 interview he did with Susan Sontag back when she was promoting her book, AIDS as a Metaphor, which was a response to the equating of homosexuality with disease at the time. Quote, David Lambeau, colon, I sort of agree with you that the disease is meaningless, and yet we're all, gay men and people in general, struck by the extraordinary coincidence that the disease came along right after the emancipation of homosexuality in Western society, after Stonewall, after the emergence of a visible gay population and an apparent increase in sexual activity. In trying to pin a meaning on the disease, I think that's the meaning that's troubled a lot of people. Susan Sontag, with a deep sigh, you know, David, when you say that, it just makes me want to cry because it's so awful what you're saying, what you're feeling. I mean, I perfectly understand why you're saying it, but it's so awful to think of people carrying the burden of that thought, that because they were free, because they were open, because they didn't hide, because they felt able to say that they felt good about themselves, then maybe somehow there's a connection with the fact that they had to endure this incredible tragedy. I can't, as someone who has been a close friend and even a lover of a number of gay men, I cannot think that that's true. It breaks my heart to think that it's true. I have to think that it's just a coincidence, that there really is no meaning, and what gay men were doing and feeling about themselves was positive, and it must go on, unquote. Susan Shamdasani refers to the Red Book as Jung's exploration and development of his personal cosmology, unrestrained by concepts. Meaning came from uh, meaning came not from conceptual insight, but by interacting with his images to find his own way back into life. Shamdasani states, quote, he saw the whole enterprise as about enabling individuals to refine their own language, develop their own cosmologies, and then further, quote, what he had hitherto taken to be psychology had been an explaining away. He thought he'd encompassed the soul, but he'd turned the soul into a dead formula, and his attempted explanation had simply killed off the subject matter. The subject matter, in this sense, is quite specific. It's fantasy. The publication of the Red Book, coinciding with this period in my life, has been a gift, affirming this role of fantasy in each person's trajectory. It fortifies my trust in the imaginal to open up a vision of aging that I truly call my own. The French philosopher Gaston Bachelard wrote, quote, we always think of the imagination as the faculty that forms images. On the contrary, it deforms what we perceive. It is, above all, the faculty that frees us from immediate images and changes them. This fundamental aspect of the imaginal, its openness, ambiguity, mobility, and its allure, leading us beguilingly to hidden worlds, contrasts with the fixedness of perception. And as Bachelard says, quote, its habitual way of viewing, its its habitual way of viewing, quote, unquote. Quoting him again, quote, if the image that is present does not make us think of one that is absent, then there is no imagination, unquote. Okay, that's a pretty profound statement, it seems to me, and I'm going to read it again. If the image that is present does not make us think of one that is absent, then there is no imagination. And so this is kind of a fundamental of everything that I've ever thought about in conversation or what have you. One thing leads to another. Whenever I notice now that whenever I say something, somebody will respond with their experience, whatever it is that they associate with what I've said. And so we're both using the imaginal and we're using words as the railroad tracks down which we can follow and continue our friendship in some way or our relationship, whatever that may be. And so when you come here, I'm always using the imaginal. Okay, I'm always in my psyche. And so, I wasn't planning to particularly say that in this class, but it comes to mind, I say it, and apparently something comes to your mind that is let me put it this way in terms of neurolinguistic programming. Um, what I have said is an anchor that connects into your psyche and pulls up something that you had not been thinking about before. And I can very easily demonstrate this. I can describe something that none of you have thought about today, but all of you can imagine it. And that's a pink elephant. Okay, nobody's been thinking about a pink elephant today. It just came to my mind as a way of describing what I'm talking about. But now all of us have an image of a pink elephant in our psyches, and every one of those is different. Okay, your pink elephant is different from my pink elephant, but nonetheless, we both know what a pink elephant would look like. And so we can have an interchange between our psyches. And so, I'm reminded of Ernest Hemingway. He was asked at one point um, how he writes a novel, and he says, "I open a vein and bleed." And what he meant by that is that he goes into his imaginal world and brings back what he finds there. It was a metaphor. He didn't physically bleed at all, but one can imagine what he meant by that. And of course, the great novelists all do that. They all uh, go into their unconscious and bring something up that they hadn't been thinking of before, but maybe came out of their personal experience, like Dostoevsky or Tolstoy, let's say, who are great novelists who have a lot to say, War and Peace, and so on, and uh, and they can express a lot. Um, and none of us would have see things exactly as they did, but pretty much. I mean, if what I've found is a lot of movies that are after novels pretty much are what I imagined them to be. But if I mention Anna Karenina and how she came to her end, everybody would imagine how Anna Karenina ended, but nobody would have imagined that it would be Nicole Kidman performing the actual event uh, in the movie. And um, none of us would have had her features or the clothing that she was wearing on the occasion. So that's what I'm talking about. And so, as a result of that fact, whenever I do one of these sessions, once I finish it, I have no idea what I've talked about. None, because it came from the unconscious in the heat of the moment in our exchange, and it'll settle back in my unconscious and maybe in yours, and um, you know I theorize that what we do here every Sunday is, in a sense, a kind of church service where um, I do what all religions do, which is to make accessible access to the healing power of the unconscious. All religions do that. I'm not claiming to be a religious person, but our discussion um, facilitates that for the regulars that follow me every week. It seems to me. Okay, so let's see. Yeah. So Deborah said, not that I blame anyone, but the circumstances are maybe not as simple as Sontag is explaining either, because you know, you know, Robert Heinlein took an entire novel to define rock, and in order to really define any word in any language, you need to be able to connect with the imagery. And that's what I really found interesting in Chinese when I was studying uh, Chinese characters. And the idea of Chinese characters is that they really present an image of the word being spoken. Um, and uh, by tradition, traditional old style Chinese characters, not pinyin, which has been instituted by the current Chinese government or the kind Chinese Communist government, let's say. Um, Pinyin only contains 900 words, but characters of the old form, there are approximately 100,000 of those, and they each of them is a picture, and so you put these pictures together and you get meaning out of it, and you get meaning much more directly than we get it um, out of, Roman letters, which uh, it's not quite the same. And those of you who studied Chinese will know what I mean. But um, one can very often Chinese cannot be understood without looking at the characters. And I'll give you a nonsense phrase that I mentioned to a friend of mine this week, which is "wo yo 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 yo," and so it sounds like I said 6 times the word "yo," which in conversation without context, you would have no idea what I said. Out of context, that sentence um, would be hard for even a Chinese person to understand without context around it. Um, and I'll say it one more time. One yo 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 yo. And if you read the Chinese characters, you understand exactly what I mean. Because exactly what I mean is I have both milk and cheese. That's all I said. Those are the words for that meaning. And in characters, you can understand it precisely. But if you just hear it, um, you wouldn't have a clue what I was talking about. So anyway, um, yeah, Deborah says, wow, 100,000 images. That's a lot of depth culturally. Absolutely. Now, in Chinese, another interesting fact about Chinese is that spoken Chinese uses the same characters for all dialects. And so if you if you only if you only speak Mandarin and somebody else only speaks of Fujianhua, Fukanese, or Guangdonghua, Canton Cantonese, um, they can't necessarily talk to one another, but they can write notes, and they understand them perfectly if it's in writing. But if it's uh, in the spoken language, the different dialects don't understand one another. It's very interesting. Um, So Deborah says, I consulted the I Ching at its significant crossroads of my life, and it was both prescient and extremely helpful. Well, that's because the same thing happens. The I Ching is basically opening your unconscious so that you can see something that you couldn't see before. I mean, it works the same as astrology. Um, everybody can take an astrology reading differently, but very often they have significant meaning to you if you allow it. Now, for me, I was against astrology a la Carl Sagan for decades, actually. Um, and, you know, Carl Sagan used to rail against the fact that there were in his time 3,000 astrology columns in different newspapers, but no astronomy columns. And sounds like a personal problem to me, but obviously people are able to get a lot from astrology, and I now do. I now have a subscription to an astrology website that sends me um, a reading every day, and it's very often right bang on in terms of my life. And so, I take that to mean that it's connecting me up with certain unconscious things that I'm not directly thinking about, but often prove to be true in my life. So there are a lot of truths in the I Ching. Um, and Shri says the astral universe, made of various subtle vibrations of light and color, is much larger than the material cosmos. The entire physical creation hangs larger than the material cosmos. Quite obviously, that's true. And yeah, okay. I'm gonna just move on, Deborah. I don't know that I can get through the rest of this article and what's given to us for the rest of the day. But let me read on. So anyway, Jung was noticing that when you speak philosophy about something, you're explaining away something. I mean, there are all these philosophers that are online and they're very profound in many ways. Um, but they're really explaining, they're mansplaining cosmology, or they're mansplaining whatever it is they're explaining. But that then they can say, oh, it's just that. Okay. Or, oh, that's just your imagination. Well, just your imagination is maybe 70% of your life. I don't know, because we use our imagination to walk into the bathroom, for crying out loud. We imagine that there's going to be a room where I can go and handle my needs, take care of my needs. And if it isn't there, I've got a problem. So, oh, I crack myself up. And yeah, and Richard says different dimensions of reality do exist. And Janti Thackeray proved that to him. Well, it's quite obvious that there are other dimensions, as I think even physicists have identified 11 or so dimensions, and only three, or three plus time, then theoretically you have four. Those are the other only four that we can actually physically experience. But um, people like Albert Einstein and so on can imagine things in multi-dimension, in what we call hyperspace. And so um, it's basically calculus. If I'll explain calculus in my simple way. Um, if you have apples and oranges, um, then you have you know a graph where you say I won't have this many apples and this many oranges, and each of us can pick where we want to be on that graph in terms of how many apples we'd like as compared to the oranges that somebody has provided. And we do that every day when we go to the grocery store. And if I add a third dimension, now I'm in three dimensions, and I can still draw that. on a graph and say out here in somewhere in this third dimension of hyperspace, I can decide how many apples, oranges, and bananas I will have. And we can add time, maybe that's useful, I don't know, but when, but if you have all the fruits of the world, for example, uh, it's really impossible to graph in the physical world how a decision on how many of each um, fruit would be selected at a given time. And they call these in Wall Street, they call these algorithms. It means it's an algorithm as a kind of formula. And you and I learned two-dimensional and three-dimensional um, algorithms in Algebra 1, let's say. But in Wall Street, they'll put 300 dimensions into an algorithm to decide what to invest in today. And human beings can no longer imagine 300 variables at the same time. And therefore, we have supercomputers that do that for us. And we can easily overwhelm supercomputers by just adding more variables. Um, but let's say there's a limit of 300 that you could have, 300 different variables, and each one is doing something a little bit different or involves something that's a little different. And a supercomputer can take all those variables in and go and whir around and do calculations on it and come out and say, this is the answer. It's like it's like a restaurant at the end of the galaxy or something, Douglas Adams' book, where he finally says that the magic number, the perfect number is 42. Well, you have to be there to read his book. But in any case, I thought it was interesting that Jackie Robinson's number, which was retired, is 42. Anyway, okay, moving on. Let's see. So, so anyway, that's what calculus is about, and all of us deal with calculus every day, whether we realize it or not. If you go to the grocery counters or the fruit counters or the vegetable counters, and you're deciding what's going to be in your family's diet for the coming week, um, your selections are coming out. Um, Based on what you think is good planning, but the powers that be have supercomputers that tell them how many bunches of bananas to buy and put on the shelf. So it all happens magically. Okay, so anyway, we ended with the quote, if the image that is present does not make us think of one that is absent, then there is no imagination. Well, of course, we have imagination in this group all the time. A while back, while driving, I caught a repeat of a Terry Gross interview with the jazz double bass player Charlie Haden in memory of his recent death. Hayden sang on his family's radio program from age 2 until age 15. When polio struck his vocal cords, he never sang after that, not even in the shower. During the interview, Ms. Gross suddenly asked if he would sing the song they happened to be discussing. He was taken aback, but accommodated her request. He credited Gross's encouragement in a later album that featured him singing a song his mother used to perform about death and the beauty and fragility of life. As the song played on the radio, I was profoundly moved by how Terry Gross's unexpected impulse had set the waters flowing again in Charlie Hayden's voice. In my case, happening upon a 25-year-old Susan Sontag interview, had a similar effect. It dislodged certain religious and cultural associations uh, to plague that had burdened my feelings of loss and my relationship to sexuality and led me to forgive what life had done. Bits of conversations, things I've read, events experienced continue to fuse with myths, images in an ebb and flow of meaning and chaos. Renewal and rot, embodiment and transcendence, forming a cosmology that reflects my lived life. Memories of sexual awakening, the discovery of soul and eros, of union, separation, despair, yearning, dissolution, permeate my thoughts on aging. And as I heard the words of the song and Hayden's voice unadorned and achingly exposed, I'm going home to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm going home to see my mother. She said she'd meet me when I come. I quickly parked my car and wept. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that one can get in a certain imaginal space that does cause you to weep, and you don't know why. Uh, and I've described many times my experience in the Boston Museum of Art, where I saw a Jackson Pollock painting and suddenly burst into tears. And to this, in general, I don't know what triggered my psyche in that way, but I didn't 20 years later when I was describing what happened, uh, and I had described the colors in the painting, and a friend of mine said the words olive drab. And when he made that connection for me, then I realized that I was weeping for the loss of one of my Marine Corps brothers, my roommate actually, who was killed on April the 11th, 1969, only 5 months after we graduated from the basic school. And I was very close to this man who was my roommate. He was like a big brother for me. And he was 2 years older, but he was like having a big brother. And when he was suddenly killed, uh, in my at a time in my youth, it was certainly shocking. But at the time, I did not have time to mourn. I too was on my way to Vietnam at that point, and I didn't have even time to think about it, let alone go to church about it or anything like that. So I had never properly mourned his death. But at that point in 2016, so 20 years after the event in the Museum of Art in Boston, I did begin my mourning, my loss of Bob Christian. And subsequently, uh, I was interviewed by his sister, um, Jan Christian, who served as a Methodist pastor for many years and is now retired. And she wrote a book called Leave No Brother Behind. And she quoted me in her book, among other things. And so we became very close because um, her experience and my experience with Bob um, coincided, and it touched me very deeply. Um, um, let's see. Okay, what I'm going to do is, for a moment, talk about fate. Um, and I'm going to stop our reading of this article right now on page 238. And I'll mark today's date. And we will commence uh, we will commence again in this article the next time we meet, whether it's next week or the following week. But I wanted to speak about fate for a moment because um, things can happen to you, among other things, accidents, which can change the direction of your life. And it happened to me um, when I was 43 years old. Um, I was walking across a parking lot at Marine Corps Base Quantico in full Class A uniform on my way to work. Uh, After 23 years in the Marine Corps, I was a lieutenant colonel. And on that particular day, which was January the 4th, 1990, heck of a way to begin a decade, uh, I slipped on the ice and broke my leg. And as an indirect result of that, I've now had to have three joint replacements over the years. It was repaired um, by the Navy at Bethesda Naval Hospital in 1990. But then ultimately I had to get a new ankle. And so I have an internal um, stainless steel, fully functional ankle, which operates like my own ankle, and always has done since I had my ankle replaced. And so I'm very pleased to report that. However, over a 28-year period, uh, up until I had my ankle replaced, I had favored that ankle. And so I put more pressure on my opposite knee and hip. And uh, that resulted in me having to get a knee replacement and a hip replacement. It doesn't slow me down much, but I am permanently disabled officially because of that, and I I do park in the disability parking space at my school, so I have a parking space that's as good as my principal's. Um, and so, but anyway, Edward Edinger spoke about accidents happening and things happening which lead to other things. For example, when I came back from Japan after 5 years in business there with my three daughters, one of whom was born there. Um, I accidentally met online um, a woman who became my second wife. And when I met her, she and I carried on an email conversation for 4 months. And at, after that 4 month time, I left my wife of 17 years and moved in with my second wife and never doubted my decision. Never. Uh, and that's, and we became what I believe is the first couple to meet online and marry. We met online on August the 22nd, 1985, which was 10 years before the World Wide Web was even made available to the public, um, just on an email network. And it's a long story how that all meshed, but um, after 4 months, I felt I knew my new wife far better than I knew my wife that I had lived with for 17 years. And I realized that we had had enough disputes that we couldn't stop fighting. And, um, the turning point for me was when my second daughter sent a note down a spiral staircase we had in our kitchen. And the note, uh, it was on a fishing line. And my second daughter said, "Please stop fighting." And at the moment and we have been having a serious argument at that moment. And at that moment, when I read that note, I realized that we couldn't, that we had really had the same fight every time we disagreed about something since we had been married, because my ex-wife would pull up everything that we disagreed on from the beginning. We'd rehash it all every time it came up. And I realized that I was unable to stop that process without leaving. And so I did leave. And I stayed very close to my daughters during the ensuing time. And over the next 15 years, I made 200, 400-mile trips to visit my daughters and be with them during their growing up years. And as a result of that, I don't I don't experience um, any difference in how they deal with me that now than I can imagine how they would deal with me if we had been together all that time. But I took that conflict out of their lives. But that was all an accident. And so was that fate? Yes, it was fate. And it was all something that just happened accidentally, but it led me on a completely different trajectory, such that this very day today, I have to end this session quite soon because um, I'm staying with my 95-year-old mother-in-law while my wife is at a Buddhist retreat over in Washington. And so I have to go up and help my mother-in-law um, see her church service, which is presented on YouTube. So, and Richard says, "That's awesome, Skip, and many people don't do that." Yes, unfortunately, many marriages, I guess about half in the U.S., end in divorce. And most people write their ex-spouse out of their lives. I have not done that. And as a result of that, I can still say that I love my ex-wife still, but I love her like I would love, or I do love my sister. I love her as a sister and as a relation, not as my spouse. And she and her husband and Debbie and I have, been in all kinds of events together, and we get along quite well. But that's because I made the investment in it over many years and still do make an investment in it. And so when, you know, when you, so I recommend that approach rather than an approach of total estrangement. You have to find a way to go on because, whether you like it or not, your ex's blood family still shows up at weddings, funerals, and other events. And if you can't get along with them, you've got a big problem. So I just observe that, Cherie said that she met Robert Redford and Sidney Pollack, who lived across from a friend in New York City. I could not believe I was in between both of them in a brown townhouse on Fifth Avenue, right down from Jackie Kennedy's. And, that sort of happenstance occurs. It does occur very frequently. One time when my second daughter was about 4 years old. She was quite a towhead, and we were living in Japan at the time, and I wanted to go buy some camera gear. So I wanted to go to the camera shop that was in the Okura Hotel, a very famous hotel near the U.S. Embassy. And and we went into this camera shop, and when we came out, um, we went over to the elevator bank, and there were two elevators that had Japanese women in kimonos holding the elevators, um, but the lights in the elevators were dark, and uh, I couldn't figure out what that was. But I said to my daughter, "Oh, I think something's going to happen," and I picked her up, and just as I picked her up, King Hussein of Jordan, the the father of the current king of Jordan, King Hussein, walked around the corner, and he looked up at my daughter and said, "Oh, you're so beautiful." And he shook her hand. And then he got in the elevators and the lights went on and they went on about their business. But, um, it was certainly a numinous moment and quite memorable. And my daughter wanted to marry one of his sons at one point, and and so who knows what things can happen if you run into people, because people in the end are just people, and as Deborah C says, they're just people. And And who would have imagined that because of my that same daughter's husband, uh, who became a an official in the George W. Bush White House, because of that fact, um, I got to meet George W. Bush at the White House one time, and I and we also were invited to eat in the uh, canteen, the flag officer's canteen, which is immediately below the Oval Office. My son-in-law invited us to breakfast one time many years ago, and who would ever imagine that I'd be eating breakfast at the White House, but I did, and uh, so silly things happen that you don't expect, and yeah, I mean, there's so many things that I could say about this, but I'm not going to. Uh, Richard says he fell himself uh, after he heard my story the first time. Never says that when I was in Sweden, I got talking to a guy who was with a group who were in NA. They were the only people whose eyes were alive with the spirit. I could see it. The guy has been on the same day as Skip. Um, we are lifelong friends, and he asked me what music I like, and I mentioned a band that he wouldn't know. Anyway, yeah, I mean, things just happen in your life, and you can't expect it. I mean, my elder daughter, when she was 5 years old, was going to kindergarten, and she wanted to invite this friend home for, I don't know, either some party or for breakfast or something. And at the end of the birthday party, um, a man knocked on our door and picked her up. And as they were leaving, I noticed that his license plate had the Japanese character for outsider Y with a circle around it, which was uh, a license plate indicating that he was an ambassador. And it turned out it was the ambassador from Norway. Uh, and so that's who my my daughter was playing with. And we, as it happens, we also ran into them in Saipan. We took a vacation in Saipan, and they were there at that time. And we still communicate with the daughter to this day. But in any case, part of my experiences with that gentleman are depicted in the novel that I wrote. It was very special to be a friend of his and to be invited for dinner at the Norwegian embassy in Tokyo, among other things. And so anyway, I have to excuse myself because I have to get my mother-in-law going uh, on her church service. And I also need to check on her because I'm her only support right now. She's approaching her 95th birthday, which comes on December 7th, believe it or not. My mother-in-law was born on Pearl Harbor Day, 11 years before. So Pearl Harbor Day was her 11th birthday. And my wife was born on Nagasaki Day, which was the date of the last atomic bomb, which ended World War II. So the two of them bracketed the Second World War in the Pacific. But anyway, peace, everyone. It's amazing what coincidence and synchronicity can do for us as we go forward. And so I will excuse myself and we'll go on